My phone talks in my ear.
Did it say, ask her again, did it say recording in progress? I'll see if I can open the
Yes,
chat.
it
But
just
then you
the
stop
recording in
recording.
progress.
Yeah, and now I've just reopened it.
Okay, now he's just I can hear in my ear, I can't talk now.
Put on the chat.
Okay, it said recording in progress, just
We
now.
need you to, what does it say, start recording in,
She's so good. With this ESP she's got.
I don't know.
we can hear you, okay. All right, well, okay, I hope we're in good shape then, and I hope the audio's coming through.
I put eggs out.
And with that, may we bow for a prayer. God of love and grace, having celebrated Easter and in our bright week, we pray that our trust in you and our joy, even though it is provisional in this time, our total hope in your kingdom coming would lift us up into that bright week. And I pray your love sustain us through this time. Lead us in this study and make it useful for you and your kingdom as we seek to serve you more faithfully. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Very good.
I thought that was
Okay,
wonderful.
well, unfortunately, I don't have the settings so that you can be heard from home. So you'll either have to call Ethel and get on speaker, or call me or something, and we'll put you on speakerphone if you need to talk. But okay, so let's open up to chapter 5. We took our detour to Daniel chapter 2 last time, and Lori, when I said a couple of sessions ago, when it said, aren't these things all written in the history of King Xerxes or whatever, and then Jim brought the book in, and Lori actually went and took me seriously and did some actual work. We'll have to teach her. So,
It's actually minimal, and what I looked up is that Ahasuerus generally recognized as the same person, of course, as Greek Xerxes, and ruled a massive empire of 127 provinces. He was born somewhere between 519 and 518 BCE, and he was also known to be susceptible to women and making extravagant offers to them, as up to offering Esther half his kingdom. And then, as we know, Esther became Xerxes' wife after his then wife Vashti refused to parade herself after a lengthy banquet and frivolity there. And Esther was crowned in the 7th year of Xerxes' reign. There is historical discrepancy. I found that although the Bible records show that Esther is queen, historical records from Greek historian Herodotus notes that Xerxes' wife was Queen Amestris. Do you know that name? Amestris. And
I just know a mess. I don't know a mess.
Amestris. Okay, and that's what it showed. And then it shows that Esther had become his come to the empire by way of her cousin Mordecai, who raised her, who advised Esther to keep her identity concealed. And then we read everything else, but that was, I kind of did some background up to that point.
Very good. Well, okay, according to this, the Greek amestris, perhaps the same as amastris, or the old Persian amastri, means strong woman, literally. And it refers to an Achaemenid queen, wife of King Xerxes and mother of Artaxerxes I.
Right.
She was one of the influential women. So I'd never heard that term before,
Okay.
amestris. But a strong woman. So there you go.
Thank you.
Okay, let me pull that back. And any questions or any comments from where we've been?
Oh, and
I
by the
just
way,
had one question.
Oh.
You mentioned something in Esther which said the most known and beloved verse,
Mhm.
but I must have written the wrong verse down because that's
Oh.
what it says. So,
Okay. let's go back to it.
Yeah, supposedly in chapter 4 somewhere. but
It's in chapter 4, and it was where Mordecai and Esther were talking back and forth about, Mordecai said, you've got to go to the king, and I think it's verse 14. And and it's really the last half that's well known, but if you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place, but you and your relatives will die. That's 14a, if you will. 14b is actually the one that is really quoted a lot.
Oh.
Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this.
Oh, I see, that's
So
what.
that's
Right.
the real.
The bit about perishing before that, and I wait, that can't be most beloved, so.
It's 14b.
14.
That's how you would
Understood.
probably lay it out.
I got it.
But it's a way of talking about Mordecai suggesting that maybe God's providence had placed them in this position.
Okay.
And she believed it. At least she did well enough to say, okay, I'll risk my neck, and if I live, I live. If I die, I die. But
Faith.
it was enough to convince her. Okay, others? All right, well, we get into this chapter about the banquet. And let me share the screen on what I have, and we'll move on. I'm going to want somebody to read the first two verses, if I can get somebody to help with that, please.
On the third day of the Esther put on her royal robes and entered the inner court of the palace, just across from the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne, facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing there in the inner court, he welcomed her and held out the gold scepter to her. So Esther approached and touched the end of the scepter.
Okay, so last week it was kind of this idea of, okay, she's going to go in uninvited, and will the king raise the scepter and thus give the command to the guards, no, don't execute her, and then gives her status, mutzdak, righteousness, or I'm sorry, she was justified in coming, but a related word is tzedakah, which means righteous. I get justification. Yeah, justified is mutzdak, and tzedakah is righteousness. So they're very closely related words, actually coming from the same root. And the idea is that the king, we kind of had that drama built in, there's suspense. Will she live or will she die? And it was answered there when the king raised his scepter. And so we hear this in these first two verses. He welcomed her, held out the gold scepter to her, and she approached then and touched the gold scepter. That must be part of the ritual. That detail is something that I hadn't seen elsewhere. So, okay.
I have a question though. It said on the third day of the fast, they're all fasting at that time. Fasting?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't remember if there's a prior reference. In verse 4:16, well, actually 15, then Esther sent a reply to Mordecai, go and gather all the Jews together of Susa and fast for me. So they were fasting in order to, as a form of prayer and petition to God, do not drink or eat for these 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same. And then, though it is against the law, I will go into the king. And if I must die, I must die. So Mordecai went away and did everything that Esther had ordered him to do. So the fast had been in place for the 3 days. That was one of their ways of offering their prayer to God. That
Would you have me my phone?
And that was her cue to go in, was after the 3 days.
right, she had set the 3 days, still not knowing what God's ultimate disposition would be, or what the king's disposition would be.
Right.
And how that related. Okay, so there's the first two verses, and I wanted to ask, what would the motivation have been behind the king's action for granting this, raising the scepter, justification to Esther? Why did he grant her that status? And Lori shrugged, she's right. It doesn't say, you can't necessarily know what was in the king's mind.
But we can speculate.
But therein lies
sure.
his wife, you know.
Well,
Yeah,
she probably didn't come regularly, that's
Yeah,
not
it's
something,
like,
so when
oh.
she actually shows up out there,
It's like,
she must have something important she needs to talk to me about, or she wouldn't be there.
and who knows, it doesn't say that he was under the influence of wine at this time, so we don't know that. It doesn't say that he was, had any other motivations that we know of, but what we do find going forward is this idea that in doing so, whatever his motivation behind it was grace. And the Hebrew word for that is pronounced khen. Khen. It's a chet and a nun that make that up. Khen. So you can all practice that at home.
You're clearing your road.
It's a biblical Hebrew noun that means grace, favor, or charming and pleasantness. So oftentimes in the older translations, we see it says, if I have found favor in your sight, to the king or to God. So if I am in your grace, which is the state that because of Christ, we feel like we live in the state of khen with God because of what Jesus has done. So the curtain's been torn in two, the scepter's been raised, we have access to the king through faith and through Christ who gives us unity. Okay, so it denotes a special relationship, delight even. The king delights in you, or God delights in you. And it is also equated with an undeserved blessing. So it wasn't that the king was obligated because this was earned. It's simply the king's prerogative. And as you read behind that, it's God's prerogative. And that's why we don't approach God as we must check certain boxes, do certain things in order to be in God's grace. We accept that we are in God's grace, and that acceptance is being found. So, okay, we move on ahead from that. Okay, oh, I have a video to play. Now, boy, do I sure hope this works. Yikes, I don't know if we're gonna hear it.
Otherwise, bring the dog back.
yeah, I looked for that, I couldn't find it.
Oh, I know what I did.
Oh, good.
I muted the TV.
Oh,
That's what it was, because it was playing some goofy thing.
Delightful
Yay.
and favorable. In the Psalms,
Oh,
a
I love
skilled
these
poet is said to have lips of khen. That is, he can craft beautiful words that bring delight. Or a dazzling piece of jewelry is an ornament of khen. It attracts attention and favor. This is why khen is often the word used to describe a gift given with delight or favor. In these cases, khen could be translated as grace. Like in the story of Esther, who approaches the king of Persia to ask that she and her people be spared from death. She calls this a request for khen. And because the king delights in Esther, he favors her and grants her wish. So, giving a gift of favor is khen because it's motivated by delight. In the Bible, the one who shows more khen than anyone else is God. Like when God rescued the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt, and they quickly betray him by giving their allegiance to a golden idol as their God. But then Moses steps in and asks God to consider giving a gift that they don't deserve. And God says yes, by showing the ultimate act of khen, forgiveness and a promise to be with these people. Now, when we turn to the authors of the New Testament, they describe God's khen with the Greek word charis, which means gracious gift. Like when we're introduced to Jesus in the Gospel of John, we're told that Jesus is God's glorious charis become human. sent into a world of people trapped in darkness and death. Because according to the Apostle Paul, we're like the living dead. God has handed humanity over to the destructive consequences of our selfish decisions. But, Paul says, God is rich in mercy, and by his charis, he's rescued us. He's talking about how Jesus' life, death, and resurrection are offered to us as a generous gift of life that is more powerful than death.
Love Bible project.
I do too.
So, okay.
I follow
And I'm glad that worked. I hope everyone heard it at home. And if you are at home, we should be able to hear you now that Pastor has learned how to turn up the volume on TV.
Can you hear me now?
Oops, I don't
Oh,
know.
yes.
All right, we got it. Thank you.
I have
All
a
right.
question. How come the KH for cars doesn't have to be that?
Yeah, well, it's a Hebrew distinction from the letter hate, but in Greek, as the language evolved, they must have, at least in that alliteration, they made charis. Now, that's a good question. What English word do we have related to the Greek charis? Remember in my big fat Greek wedding, everything went back to, no, not cherish, charis, charisma, a gift, and it's a some sort of a special favoring, a gift. That's where we get charisma from, and that's spelled with a CH, but we say charisma, not charisma. So, but I feel like the grandfather in my big fat Greek wedding. He said, give me any word and I'll tell you how that came from your Greek.
Right.
So, charisma, well, it goes back to.
I have some Windex in my purse.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Remember the
So,
Windex?
You go back again. The first one was Hebrew or Greek?
The first one is khen, that's Hebrew.
Hebrew.
Anything with the is going to be Hebrew.
Sounds like you're clearing your throat.
Yes.
Well, you know, I have a friend who is Muslim, and when she speaks, she has that
Yeah,
in her.
Yeah,
in
there
her
are many guttural type sounds
I've
in
heard
the
her.
Middle Eastern languages and other languages, African languages, that you almost have to grow up in it to be able to reproduce. And if you don't, it's very difficult for us to comprehend or find a way to do that. There's a Jewish comedian, I think it's Gary Gulman, who said that I think we Jewish people drink a lot of dairy products because we're always. So, okay. Then let's read, would somebody read for us 3 through 10, and we'll move on.
Then the king asked her, "What do you want, Queen Esther? What is your request? I will give it to you, even if it's half the kingdom." And Esther replied, "If it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet I have prepared for the king." The king turned to his attendants and said, "Tell Haman to come quickly to a banquet, as Esther has requested." So the king and Haman went to Esther's banquet. And while they were drinking wine, the king said to Esther, "Now tell me what you really want. What is your request? I will give it to you, even if it's half the kingdom." Esther replied, "This is my request and deepest wish. If I have found favor with the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my request and do what I ask, please come with Haman tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for you. Then I will explain what this is all about." Haman was a happy man as he left the banquet. But when he saw Mordecai sitting at the palace gate, not standing up or trembling nervously before him, Haman became furious. However, he restrained himself and went on home. Then Haman gathered together his friends and Zeresh, his wife.
Okay, we'll stop there for now. Okay, so a couple of things that I wanted to talk, and the question I have is, why 2 banquets? What is this? And what did she not ask for when the king first said in verse 3, "What do you want, Queen Esther?" Well, what did she really want? She wanted the Jewish people to be saved.
Yeah.
But in some wise and calculating reason, which we're going to explore, we may not solve, but we're going to explore, she didn't go there first. May have been that if she did that and accused Haman right off the bat, conditions weren't right for the king to be in a place to, so we'll see what kind of, what her plan is in calling for these 2 banquets. Okay, why 2 banquets? Here are some things that I looked up. I did not generate these things. Where I found them on the internet when I could give an attribution, I'll put it up there. Some of these were just generic and general. So one possible answer of why 2 banquets is to build suspense and nurture the favor of the king towards Esther. So she was buttering him up.
Right, more wine tomorrow.
So I wish you could be as entertained as I am when I'm sitting at home in my chair about 4 o'clock in the afternoon or 5, or even 3. And if Chris is home and she's over in her seat, was he our male cat? Dinner time is 5, and at 3 o'clock he's just rubbing his head on her, and she laughs. He says, yeah. And he will come back and rub his head up, and I'm so entertained by all of that. So I think maybe Esther was doing a little bit of the Wuzzy routine here, buttering up the king.
There's a Hammy and Louie. They're corgi dogs. It's on YouTube. And one Hammy, he thinks it's dinner time. He's like, pat his owner's face. He's like that.
Well, and poor Was, if Chris is working late and not home by 4 o'clock or going on to 5, he's like, okay, I've got to try the backup human. He'll come to me.
The food chain.
Okay. So it could be building suspense and favor by inviting Haman to not just 1, but 2 feasts. She flattered Haman, which you'd think that's counterintuitive, but she had a reason for this. She was feeding his pride before his fall, according to this interpretation. Now, this is not authoritative. This is where it gets to opinion. So you don't have to believe this. In fact, if you have other perspectives, please shout them out. But she may have been feeding his pride to set up his more dramatic fall, and then created a more dramatic high-tension atmosphere. Okay, so and in that case, it might be a novelist's device to build drama into the story that will keep the reader engaged. So there's any number of those things that could be an explanation. Then the other part was strategic timing. That there was a gap between the 2 banquets, naturally. There was at least an overnight, if not longer. I don't know how long it took to prepare those things. And this ended up allowing time for some critical intervening events that I don't think Esther could have counted on happening, maybe hoped happened. That was part of her plan, but she, all this was just she was doing this, risking herself and trusting. But there was a gap of time after the first banquet and before the second banquet. And in there we hear a story, and I think we'll read it in a bit here. I don't think we've read it yet, or did we read it already? I don't remember. About the king's insomnia, and he called for the books to be read. Okay, so we will touch on that then, since we haven't. But that was a critical event that if it hadn't been for this timing, and it shows God's providence, that's, you can speculate, but that's one of the reasons they think it was for this timing to let certain things marinate and take place.
It's anticipation.
Yes. Okay, so another possible reason, there's several of these. I hope you don't get tired of this. But this question, why 2 banquets? When I studied it, I got lots of different possible answers. Creating a private setting. She needed to move the conversation out of the public, where she had first come to the king. And apparently the throne room, now this is Jewish speculation, that the Persian throne room would have been filled with idolatrous icons or statues or whatever. And plus it was not, all of this was kind of a public proceeding among the king's court. And she did not want to risk putting all of this in front of the king where someone could say something contrary or have the king's ear. So that makes sense to me, that she wanted a more private setting where the king would be more relaxed and receptive. So if you hear me asking all of you at some point, hey, let me take you to dinner, be very suspicious. what my motives are.
Well, if she was gonna do like Rosie does, then she definitely should want a private room.
It's speculated that this was part of her scheme to entrap Haman. By forcing him to attend, she separated Haman from his support structure, which at the banquet, he didn't have anybody there, so he was left exposed when she was ready to make the accusation finally. So all of this makes a lot of sense, and it's stuff that I wouldn't have intuited on my own without doing a little research. So hopefully it's interesting to you. Why two banquets? Now this is from a Jewish site called Chabad.org. I want to give credit.
Right.
Here are some of their speculations, and they actually, the Jewish people know much more than I do the interpretive documents that came up alongside and after the Old Testament readings called the Talmud and the Mishnah. And they were rabbinic interpretations. And so much of what sometimes you hear in tradition that isn't in Scripture has its roots there. Did you see the Noah movie with, was it Russell Crowe as Noah?
Yeah, Russell Crowe.
Okay. And did that surprise you or shock you, that movie at all?
Yes.
Yeah, I was like, wait a minute, where did this come from? I didn't think it was, I just, I'm thinking, the gentle old man with hearing God and rainbows, and boy, and I walked away thinking, this is disturbing. Where did they get all this from? Well, it's not the scriptural part, but it has historical roots in the Mishnah and the Talmud and the stories that came up alongside. So a lot of what you're getting here has at least that overtone that they know more about what some of those interpretations were, and so it may come out in their interpretation here. So fearing backlash, having approached the king unbidden, a crime punishable by death, Esther feared that if she would immediately accuse Haman right there in court, the king, perhaps even at the instigation of Haman, would vent his wrath on her. So she delayed that. She even said, my deepest wish is that you will come to a banquet. And that really wasn't her deepest wish, as far as we know. But it was her deepest wish to make it,
At the time.
make it possible, yeah.
Right.
She was trying to make her deeper wish even possible through this. Thus, Esther decided to put a bit of distance between that incident and her accusation. So that's why she didn't do it there in the king's court. She did it asking for a banquet and then went privately. Okay, here's another speculation. Why wouldn't she do this in front of the king? I've already kind of alluded to this. The Talmud explains that when Esther entered the king's throne room, a place full of idols, we assume from what the Jewish tradition says, the divine presence left her. Now, I didn't know that, and I don't think we would hold to that. If I went into a room filled with idols, I don't feel like I'd be separated from God, because I know that the idols have no power and no standing. But at this time, that's how they would have interpreted that. And even to this day, when you go to places on the Temple Mount, there are restricted areas. You can't come in if you are, not a Muslim or a Jew or whatever the case may be. We found that in the time of when Jesus was tried under Pilate, and Pilate invited the Sanhedrin in. He said, "We can't come into your place. This is unclean for us." So there's different restrictions about what they feel like they can do. If they go into the place that is unclean or full of idols, then perhaps the divine presence would leave you. Right? I think that was their interpretation at that time. We would look at it differently. Deciding that perhaps this wasn't the place most suitable for miracles to occur in the king's court, she invited the king to her own private quarters. However, Haman arrived wearing an outfit. Now, this is not in scripture, but this is the tradition. He arrived with an outfit, and it would make sense, with the design of an idol. So that's what they speculate. He was wearing his idolatry on his sleeve because those were the gods he worshipped.
Right.
And it was actually a sign. And they believe this was the reason why Mordecai refused to bow to him in the first place. Somebody wearing that idol against God, I can't bow to. So maybe that's why she pushed off her request. The next night, however, Haman was brought to the party right after leading Mordecai on the king's horse. I'm getting ahead a little bit here, so maybe we need to read some more. And I guess I didn't update the verses here, so.
No, because at the end it does say that he saw Mordecai standing at the gate, and then he didn't bow down to him, and he went home mad.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
So
yeah,
that could be referred
we're going to get
that.
more of this detail in chapter 6.
Okay.
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 Apparently, after the details we're going to find out later, they're thinking that when he came back for the second banquet, he was hurried, and it was right after being humiliated in front of everyone, having to honor Mordecai, and that they speculate that when he was leading the horse around honoring Mordecai, he wouldn't have worn this religious symbol because he would have thought that would have besmirched it. I don't know this to be true, but it's interesting. So they think that not wanting his God to witness his humiliation, he chose not to wear the outfit with his icon on it. And at that point, Esther then made her real request of the king and accused Haman. So she did it at the second banquet when he was there without the idolatrous symbol and when he was really, had just been humiliated. So lots of depth to this. I told you there were a lot of these, so I hope you don't get bored with it. Oops, I gotta click on that first, okay. Okay, did she do it to arouse the king's jealousy in a way? Esther knew, this is really fascinating to me, Esther knew that to succeed against Haman, she would first have to slowly arouse the king's jealousy and suspicion of Haman. So she was trying to set the stage here. So when she issued her invitation to the first party, and there's really no way you would catch this in the English translations, especially when Ethel read hers, you would not catch this. Right, well, yeah, Ethel, she messes up everything. When issuing her invitation to the first party, Esther invited the king. Now that's in Ethel's translation, it's probably in yours. Mm-hmm. Let me give a banquet for the king. And then her primary guest would be the king, and Haman was an add-on that's implied. I'm giving a banquet for the king. His a plus one, yeah. We can see this in her words. If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come to a banquet today that I have prepared for the king. And that's explicit in most of your translations. Interesting. That's the first invitation. When it came to her invitation to the second party, Esther said, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I will make for them. Esther's, I can't get your name straight. Ethel's translation says, for you. Now, that is not incorrect, but we don't have a way in our modern English of realizing that you is plural. Mm-hmm. For y'all.
Right.
So that's where them comes in.
Right.
But the word and the words behind it in the original Hebrew are that. The first one is I invite a banquet for the king. I invite you to a banquet. The second one for you, plural. So now she has subtly put Haman a little bit more equal with the king, and that they speculate that would have aroused his jealousy. So very clever, and I wouldn't have caught that word change without these kinds of tools. So I think that's really interesting. But her invitation was deliberately different.
Which made him think and have someone tell me.
Yeah. Wait a minute, it's my banquet, now what's
How
with
come he's
this?
here?
But instead of jealousy, he could have also looked at it as, how dare she?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was a risk.
Because she's a woman,
Mhm.
and we know how that was, and then.
Why would she
tolerate
invite
her,
somebody else
yeah.
too?
So,
And not just
but it
him?
may have been subtle enough that the king, his jealousy might have been angered a little, or arisen a little bit, but it wasn't so blatant. Well, maybe she just used the word that, it wasn't enough. I mean, somehow in God's providence, in Esther's wisdom, whatever brought it about, she was able to escalate this enough to get the king on edge, but not to arouse him to anger against her.
Do we think that she premeditated and thought this process through, or she just kind of winged it?
She fasted for 3 days, so
Yeah.
who knows what insight she got from God.
And that, I would take,
So we're saying really, she knew her walk away.
Yeah.
But how do I do it to get to where I'm going?
I want to think,
Yeah.
Cause and effect, basically.
I want
Get a
to
lot of
think
information
that,
on fasting.
because even though God works providentially to do good things, God works through people, and people are not perfect. But I think that's wonderful, and so I don't believe that God ever works through what we would call fatalism. That's a Greek concept, the fates, everything is predetermined, all right? We believe in predestination, but it's not fatalism. Fatalism is the word fate, meaning, yes, the fact that just fell on the floor, God willed that to happen. And that was part of the fate that we all think. So that's fatalism. Everything is orchestrated by God. God is the marionette master with the puppets on strings, and we're just the puppets. And so in the fatalistic view, well, Esther didn't really come up with these kinds of things. She was being manipulated by God in every detail. So that's one interpretation. I don't share that one, and I don't think most of you do. I think we're more along what I'm hearing from you, is that, yes, God was at work, but he was working through a person he believed to be faithful enough and wise enough to figure this out. And I think that's wonderful, because it shows that God doesn't take over for us and not allow us any agency. God trusts us, and sometimes we get it right, and sometimes we don't. And when we don't, we trust that God picks us up and gives us new chances. So I like that this lifts up Esther and her agency in coming up with these things, and how sophisticated this may be. So she set this up, and if she got the king jealous enough, it would give her a chance to time her accusation against Haman, and see if she could get him executed right there on the spot. Okay, let's read 11 through 14 and finish the chapter. Anyone? You can start at 10 just to get a running start.
Haman controlled himself, however, went to his house and sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh. Then Haman recounted to them the glory of his riches and the number of his sons, and every instance where the king had magnified him, and how he had promoted him above the princes and servants of the king. Haman also said, "Even Esther the queen, let no one but me come with the king to the banquet which she had prepared. And tomorrow also I am invited by her with the king."
Pride.
Yet all this does not satisfy me. Every time I see Mordecai, the Jew, sitting at the king's gate. Then Zeresh, his wife, and all of his friends said to him, "Have a gallows 50 cubits high made, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go joyfully with the king to that banquet." And the advice pleased Haman, so he had the gallows made.
Okay, so that takes us to the end of chapter 5. In verse 14 at the end, now hers said gallows. Does anyone have anything different than gallows?
Pole.
Okay,
Pole.
so there's a discrepancy there in how that could be translated and how it was. So in many of them it says, set up a sharpened pole.
Oh, for impalement.
For impalement, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, either way, it's the tool of execution. But I'm not sure why that discrepancy. I didn't actually go in to look and see that because I didn't realize mine saying pole. I didn't think about the gallows, and I should have. Okay, so I always like to give you the names of the meanings of names. Sometimes they are instructive, and sometimes it's just incidental. Zeresh, the wife of Haman, whatever, is known as the scheming wife of Haman, the Agagite, who advised him to build, and here it says gallows, for Mordecai. Her name likely derives from Persian origins, meaning gold or star of Venus, though it is sometimes interpreted to mean misery or estranged. So it's kind of confusing, but I wanted to at least. She was known as scheming, and we're not sure. Yes, Patty.
Funny story. I was getting some blocks put in my back for paint this morning. So I'm laying on the table, and I forget what the song was, but it had Venus in it. And one guy's like, "Are they saying fetus?" And the doctor's like, "No, it's Venus."
Oh my gosh. So you don't need autocorrect to mess things up like that. Our brains do the same thing.
Right.
All right, so,
What you hear.
well, I will see your funny story and raise with an actual autocorrect when it was first coming out. And this was old technology because it was when I was in seminary. And the paper that a colleague turned in to the professor was something about Paul's talking to the Philippians. Well, that's what he thought he typed in. I don't know how he spelled it. And when the final product was in front of the professor, it said Paul's letter to the Philippians.
He was really deep into it.
He wanted to see the bird.
He was ahead of his time.
I encourage funny stories. Anyone else? Okay, let's look into this a little bit further then. Zeresh, it's
He was a
going to...
gynecologist, did you say?
He became.
Okay, so the tables now turn in chapter 6, and this is going to be, there's lots of intrigue here, and listen as we read going forward, that now Haman has gone before his friends and his wife and said all these things, and he feels like that's his safety net. These are his folks. It's like me when I come complaining to you. I feel like I can unload and do all of that because you're my safety net. You're my peeps. Well,
Peeps.
but it's going to change, and it's going to change rather abruptly. So if I can have us read, and I've put down 6:1 to 14. Does that get us through the whole chapter?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and read the chapter, and then we'll reflect on it.
Okay.
And then my plan is to end at chapter 6 today, and then we'll save 7 and so forth for the time going forward. Okay, who's up for reading maybe the whole chapter 6, or if you get tired?
I will.
All right. Okay, here we go.
Go for it.
I'll go forth. That night the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes.
Do you remember that story?
Yeah.
That was back in chapter 2, verses 21 and 22. Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? The king asked. Nothing has been done for him, his attendants answered. The king said, who is in the court? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about impaling Mordecai on the pole he had set up for him. His attendants answered, Haman is standing in the court. Bring him in, the king ordered. When Haman entered, the king asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought to himself, who is there that the king would rather honor than me?
Pride.
Yep.
I mean, he was the vizier of the king, the kind of the second in command.
Got it.
So yeah, he was set up for this.
Makes sense, actually. So he answered the king, for the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on his head.
Oh, sure.
Then let the robe and horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done to the man the king delights to honor. Go at once, the king commanded Haman. Get the robe and the horse, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate.
Oh,
Do not neglect anything you have recommended. So Haman got the robe and the horse. He robed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done to the man the king delights to honor. Afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief, and told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had happened to him. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin. While they were still talking to him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet Esther had prepared.
So isn't that the twists?
I
are
know.
I bet he just,
Yeah.
oh, yeah.
I bet, yeah.
He
He
just
just
curl up and just.
So
No.
this is
Color
where
in his
the
face.
cliche today, somebody would say, you just can't make this stuff up. Well, so, yeah.
But he was so sure.
He was so sure
It was for him.
that it was gonna be for him.
Yeah.
And I
And he goes to
wish
Mordecai.
that there were verses in between 10 and 11.
Yeah.
Because after 10 says,
Yeah.
do this for Mordecai, leave nothing out that you've suggested. It doesn't give us what I think could be paragraphs of
Oh, yeah.
what Mordecai's,
Haman.
what went through him, so what Haman's
Yeah.
went through his mind.
Sounds like a
at that
movie
time.
starring
I mean,
Charles
it just,
Yeah.
when you skip on to that next, it's like, okay, so Haman went and did it.
Yeah.
But we know,
Oh, yeah.
and perhaps that's one of the author's techniques, is we fill in that part of the story.
Mhm.
We know that this was just an absolute,
Mortifying.
he was shocked. Up until that time, he thought, oh, the king wants to honor me. And then this abrupt, not only someone else, but the very one who is my enemy that I wanted the king to execute.
And it's because he had the books, the Chronicles read to him to remind him where all this things stem from.
So in verse 11, it says Haman took the robes and did everything that was told. All right,
And he did.
why did he do that?
The king had ordered it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
he
Once
better.
the king orders it,
Yeah.
it doesn't
Better
matter
do
what
it.
you've got. He
That's right.
didn't stop to say, but wait a minute.
Yeah, no.
In those, in
Objection, Your Honor.
that setting,
I object.
had he hesitated, had he protested,
Oh,
he
yeah,
would put his own head at risk.
on the spot.
So it just, so he did what you do, even with the
King's
greatest bitterness
Oh,
and
yeah.
the greatest reluctance you could possibly think of. He went and did all of these things for Mordecai. And this is where they speculate that this was after the second banquet, and it gave the king time to have this insomnia and have the books read to him and be reminded providentially of Mordecai's, did I get it wrong, the order?
It was after the first banquet.
It was
because
after
they
the
hadn't
first, they
had
hadn't gone to the
Yeah.
second.
Okay, thank you. I get the details really mixed up, so thank you, I need correction on that. They speculate that he wouldn't have been wearing his idolatrous
Yeah.
logo or anything,
Yeah.
because he wouldn't have wanted that when he was parading Mordecai through the town. So,
Oh, yeah.
all right, so
So he-
that left him vulnerable.
yeah.
Okay.
After the evening.
Now, I want to do this, the tables are turning, and boy, are they ever turning. Zeresh and the friends' words, the power of identity. Now, this again, well, you can take this as just opinion. The advisors specifically note that because Mordecai is of Jewish descent, Haman is doomed to fail. Interesting. If that were the case, why didn't they say something the first time he went to them? I don't understand. So this is kind of a Jewish interpretation of what's happening here. And they believe that this reflects the biblical principle that we believe that God protects his people, echoing the promise that those who curse them will be cursed. That's in the Old Testament. I will be your God, you will be my people. Those who bless you, I will bless. Those who curse you, I will curse. That's part of their understanding in the earliest parts. So this is an interpretation from a Jewish or maybe even a modern perspective of others that somehow, even in these words from Zeresh and Haman's friends, you wouldn't expect them to say, well, of course, he's Jewish.
Yeah.
So, of course you're not going to prevail against him. That's a little bit odd and might need some further study to see why it is they would have had that in their mind. But so not only have the tables turned with the king ordering him to honor Mordecai, he's mortified. Now he goes back to his safety net thinking, well, at least I'll find some comfort here. Yeah. Boom, tables have completely turned and they are of no comfort whatsoever. Divine providence, though God is never explicitly mentioned in Esther,
Right.
This verse, among many others, shows the hidden hand of God reversing the plots of the wicked and turning Haman's pride into humiliation. Now that's interpretive. Others might read this and not take it that way, but from the eyes of faith, many of us will say, this is our ultimate trust in God. It's when Joseph said, you intended it for evil,
That's what I was
but
saying.
God intended it for good over decades.
Yeah.
There's decades of suffering in between, and when we get in the decades of suffering, it's easy for us to say, maybe God isn't really protecting his people or working out something. It's easy for us to doubt. And that's why Joseph is such an amazing example of faith. How in the world could he keep his faith through all that he went through over such a long period of time and keep this idea that, God's going to work it out. God's going to bring it all together in the end. And that's, I find myself coming to the edge of despair sometimes when I think of the state of the world. Not only now, but as it has been in history. But to be honest with you, even in my own heart, and I feel so inadequate to my faith and my discipleship that I despair. I think, God, how can you possibly forgive me? How can you possibly grant me khen? It's totally unmerited. And it's like the prodigal returning home. He wanted to merit favor with his father by saying, make me an artisan in your court, train me, and I'll pay my debt back. But before he could get the words out, the khen of the father said, my son has returned, put a robe on him. Totally unmerited.
But I think the difference is, for you and your question, is it's not questioning how could God do that to you. You have faith because of Jesus, that we know God forgives. It's not a question, does he? Will he? No, it's a question, thank you, God. You forgive me. And I thank you for coming and giving your life so that my sins can be forgiven. And that's what we have to focus on. Because we watched a lot of Easter shows. I mean, it's interesting because you do the comparison and contrasting, which is kind of what we're doing here. And it's fascinating, the four Gospels, how they differed in their telling of Jesus from the time he's baptized from John all the way through resurrection. It varies. And it's like you said, we look through and we sift through and see how they differ and what's a perspective. But the big walk away, that the Old Testament is law. And we saw when we did read the Bible in a year, how it was divided into those categories, a representation of all those different areas. But the big thing was, it really was about law and those prophets. But what we have to really focus on is why God sent his Son to represent himself and the Holy Spirit. Here's the Old Testament, here's the New Testament, because this is what God wants us to remember of what and why it was done, so that you don't have to have those questions anymore. It's about believing that,
exactly.
every person here We all get
Yeah.
down on ourselves and everything, but when it really comes to it, your faith, what does your faith tell you? I know I'm forgiven. I have to forgive myself. It's about forgiving myself for feeling so vulnerable. That's really it.
For me, it's that is one aspect of my faith that says, inside this feels absurd to me, but I still believe it.
Yeah.
It's not impossible. And so I've said about my faith, I choose to believe in the absurd over the impossible. Did God create out of nothing? It's absurd to believe that, but it's impossible to believe that creation created itself. So
You know,
We had some big bang and everything
yeah.
showed up.
Yeah, you know, you open a Pandora box, because when we were watching a lot of the shows, it was interesting because Tommy and I would say, here's the disciples who were right with Christ and they saw all the miracles firsthand. I mean, I saw it with my own eyes. How could I not believe? And yet, they had doubts.
Yeah.
And Thomas kept doubting, and it had to be proved. And yet, if they had doubts when they were supposed to be so devout, I think that was a big lesson for all of us. We're only human. We have those moments where we doubt, and you're absolutely right. I think that's why sometimes a lot of our younger generations, excuse me, Andrew, but Andrew, actually I'd like you to have input because this is so true. Even with our children who are a little older than you, and they went to vacation Bible school, they went to church and everything, and they understand the premise of our faith and everything, but when they were in school and their friends, etc., it was like once upon a time, 7 days, God, it was like a story for some children who were not exposed. And there's a lot of the Bible that it is so totally faith. Because you and I can't prove a lot of this at all. We can't prove that Esther did any of this. You know what I'm saying? We can't prove the book, but it's our faith that holds us on that there is something more important in this life, and it was a gift that we're sitting here today. It's a divine providence of God that you and I are sitting here today with Pastor Jim. You know, and you can either believe that or, you know, you just go on with your life and you get up every day and you go to sleep every night and you get up every day and whatever. And I think it's our essence of wanting more, but I believe that's a gift from God to let us be able to believe that and feel complete.
And content.
I mean, because when you look at what Jesus went through, oh my gosh, his years of ministry, the torture and the crucifixion, and you vision yourself as his mother looking up at her son, and it's like, oh my gosh, this was real. This was like you and me, you know, real, and so was he. And to see him suffer so much physically, and then the resurrection actually came true. It was not a hoax.
It wasn't.
So if we know that it wasn't a hoax, then we've got to believe.
And we need to spread that word to the people who do not know.
Yeah.
We have to tell that
It
story.
is the truth.
And it's okay to acknowledge that this seems absurd, but it's real.
Yeah.
The absurd is possible, and we have examples of things that through history people thought were impossible that turned out to be absurd, but ended up being possible.
Yeah.
So when I describe how sometimes I have the inner doubts and turmoil and wondering and thinking is all lost, I try to deliberately say, sometimes I come to the edge of despair.
Right, the edge.
The edge.
Right, I heard
But because of what I know of God's khen, because Joseph is such an example to me that I fall short of, I think, okay, I can't give in to despair and total cynicism. Even though I approach the word, I tell you to do it, be skeptical in a healthy way. But I find myself, when I get information and so forth bombarding me, I can become almost cynical very easily, cynical against even God. And so I really caution against that cynicism to say, you may come to the edge of that, and that's understandable, but know that God will never do anything that betrays God's essence of love. And whatever humans do, whatever history holds, however long it takes, you can always trust in God to do the right thing and to bring things to fulfillment in a way that we can't even conceive of.
Well, I think that when there are people who are searching in their life for something more, and they have not committed their life to Christ, I think it's important. Andrew, am I right in this? That I think it's important that when you are searching for faith, that you need to hear the honesty that, there's a lot in this that I don't understand, and I'm only taking the word of whoever interpreted and wrote the text. But I believe in my heart that God sent Jesus, and he died so that my sins, so that after I die, there is a heaven. I believe that. But I think if people are coming to find themselves, they need to also hear that there are things that we don't totally get. And there's things I have questions about, but it's like, I think Pastor Jim said like 5 weeks ago or something, when he said, we don't have all the answers. We too, sitting around this table, have questions on, really? But the bottom line is where it counts, where the foot hits the floor, if we believe. And that's what helps people not go over that cliff. Because, and I think they need to see us as human, that, it can seem kind of far-fetched to us too sometimes, but it's our faith that makes a difference.
Yeah, if you have your faith, if your faith is strong, that's what really matters right there. Because if you don't have the faith, then you have to be like Thomas, where I have to see it. But if Jesus said, though, if you believe without seeing, you're blessed. So that's it right there.
Just like you and your wife, who will be welcoming an absolute miracle, and you will not have a concept of that until, Dad, you see that little girl, Mary Jane, and she's placed in your arms, and you go, oh, because you're living the growth right now and watching it. I mean, there's nothing like, and then I think that's your first aha, that, oh my God, God is such a phenomenal, a miracle. It is a miracle when your child will come to you and you think, thank you. Yeah.
And as you say that, you talk about your faith being strong, and Jesus said, even the faith the size of a mustard seed. He was trying to compare the smallest of all seeds that were known to them to this great shrub or bush that was sometimes 20 feet in diameter or high, that comes from this small. So he really gave some encouragement for those of us who feel like our faith is just too weak. It's not quite enough. And I look at Joseph again, as I don't even come close to being as patient and believing and faithful as Joseph. And so rather than feeling shame over that, I think of the heroes of the faith, and I hear God saying, you're not meant to be them. You're meant to be you. So, and when you say it's encouraging to hear people who are leaders in the faith express that they don't know everything, express that they have pain and doubts and worries and wonders. And the one that comes to my mind is what was discovered after Mother Teresa's death. All through the end of her life, I mean, you invoke her name, and everybody, it seemed universal, everybody thought, here is the epitome of Christ's discipleship. She has lived in poverty willingly, and she embraces the dying and the lost and the forsaken at whatever cost. And she was always very staunch about that. And like Esther, she was wise, because people in the world would approach her all the time with, oh, I think what you're doing is great. Let me fund your ministry. And she's like, you're going to have ulterior motives for that. So she really, you couldn't get anything past her. And so you think, who could be more perfect of an example that in our lifetimes than Mother Teresa? And when I start thinking, yeah, she's what I should be, here I am walking around with a spare tire and not doing, what's God leading me to? But in this case, what was discovered, what was discovered afterwards, and she never wanted them published? It's her journals about her inner doubts, her dark night of the soul. And there's a whole tradition about the dark night of the soul among the church's most profound leaders, that there are extended periods of time when they feel completely distanced from God, and there's just nothing. And she went through the dark night of the soul, which makes it even more poignant that even though she was feeling these things, she didn't give up, and she followed what she believed was her calling. But I think it's comforting to me that even she had doubts and fears. And
so do these people.
And I think of John Newton, the author of the hymn Amazing Grace. And when they sing Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I think that is so poignant. Because, when I think about that, I think, well, it's God's khen, God's grace. It's not about what I've done or what I will do to earn anything. It's amazing grace, even though in my time, people could look at me and say, yeah, wretch. Stamp it on his forehead, wretch. Well, John Newton stamped it on his forehead from all time. Do you know what John Newton's previous life had been before that, before he was saved? He was a slave trader. He was a captain on the vessel. And when he was saved, he was so appalled by what he did. And it's like Judas, how could I ever be forgiven for such a thing? But he believed. He gave us that song. So forgive me if I get offended when the more politically correct people these days want to change the first verse to Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved and set me free. That's not untrue. That's true. But the idea of feeling like you are a wretch and the only thing that saves you is God's khen, I think is too important.
Well, I'm going to look at that differently while singing it now.
Yeah.
Amazing khen.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's interesting.
We're singing in DC.
What?
We're singing in DC. Yes, we are.
So, and for those who say saved and set me free, I'm not going to condemn them and say you're terrible people, but I will take the opportunity whenever possible to say, hey, by the way, when you sing it the original way, this is an aspect that means a lot to me.
I'd like to ask a question. All of you over the Easter, did you watch any of the movies where Jesus did the Mount of Olives, the Beatitudes?
Oh, the Sermon on the Mount, yeah.
Did you? Okay. I want to say thank you for when we did Bible study on all the parables. It's amazing the poetic, beautiful way those parables and and so many times, Andrew, this is for you. This was really interesting. Do you remember when we talked about the parables?
I don't think I was here.
He wasn't here yet? Yeah. It was really fascinating because when I was younger, you would read the parables and the minister would talk about parables, but they never broke them down as to what is, what's a walkaway. And you think, well, okay, and the different symbolism, the metaphors, etc. But when we studied it, you realize it's the same story over and over, but it's worded differently depending on the audience that Jesus was talking to, so they would be able to understand it. And it was incredible how you can, now when you hear and read the parable, you know exactly what it's all about. There was one that was really interesting where Jesus is referring to, you're all like sheep, and I am the gate. And I have the gate, and I can open the gate for you, the sheep, to come through. You cannot go through the gate without, you cannot go on the other side of the gate without coming through the gate with me. And it's like, oh my, it's all about accepting Christ as your Savior for eternal life. And so I thank you for the parable lesson. You guys all remember those. Those were so interesting.
Well, for those that weren't here, that's a great commercial now, because I will say that now you can binge watch all of them on YouTube. It was one of the first things I did. I did a little setup, a couple of sessions first, but to me, and that's where Ken Bailey's teachings shine through. To me, it was the best teaching I've ever come up against. So we did about 13 or 14 parables with Ken Bailey's guidance. And I would love it if you would all binge watch. Binge watch those. It's just really helpful. So we talked about Haman's pride going before the fall.
I can tell we need a sleepover to watch movies.
Just
So
gems.
now, if you look at once the tables turn, and it at least starts in verse 10 of chapter 6. After the king gives the order, this is what the king does to honor someone he wishes. Excellent. Then he said, quickly. Now the word quick is what I want to underline here. Quickly, take the robes and the horse and do what you're saying. So it's like all of a sudden things start rushing. And things get out of hand for Haman especially. It's like he can't keep up with trying to protect himself
No
because
time.
things are going too fast for him. You know, when you hear people in professional sports say, when you first start out, the game moves so fast, but with experience and so forth, it slows down. Well, here, this was getting, and so it says quick in chapter 10, and then it says in verse 12 rather, Haman hurried home dejected afterwards, so hurried. Everything was hurried and rushed. And then after that, in the last verse 14, the king's eunuchs arrived and quickly took Haman. So all that's intentional. You've got this section like, oh, the tempo sped up here.
Yeah.
And you can see that he's
Kind of like a crescendo, and then it goes
Mhm.
back.
So the urgency in this verse and 14, or some of these that are pointed out, are described as, in the King James it will say hasted, they hasted. In the newer versions it'll say hurried. In the Hebrew text, this device was necessary for several reasons, and again, this is interpretation. The culmination of God's providence, the crescendo, as Nancy mentioned. The scene is designed to show God's precise timing. Now, it doesn't say that in the text. That is left for the reader to intuit or to accept. While Haman's advisors were predicting his downfall, yikes, the agents of that downfall were already on their way to pick him up. And that highlighted that God's plan moves quickly to turn the tables here. So that's one interpretation that I think is useful. We're almost done here. The staging of, why the hurry again? The staging of Haman's downfall. Esther had strategically prepared this second banquet, according to this interpretation, to trap Haman. The immediate summons ensures he goes from his humiliation straight to condemnation, allowing him no time to formulate a defense. A hasted exit from trouble. Haman had been forced to honor Mordecai and was in mourning with his head covered. The eunuchs hasted him, suggesting that he was reluctant to go due to fear and dejection, yet he was compelled to face the judgment that awaited. And then when you think of Persian court protocol, the text reflects the custom of sending swift messengers to collect the high-ranking guests for a banquet, marking the supreme urgency and importance of the king's invitation. So when a banquet was announced, when anything needed to get to the people, the messengers, it was hop to it. You know, it was double time, always. The kings issued this invitation, this order, whatever it is, and we know that from the New Testament when Jesus gave the parable of the banquet, saying a banquet was given by the wealthy one, and the invitations went out. So, and in their culture, it's kind of like a save the date.
Right.
You are invited to a banquet. And the next time I come will be when I come to get you to show up because everything's ready. So the first one is like, be ready for this. And then the second time the messenger comes is, all right, time to go. So in the first time that the people went in the parable, the people apparently accepted that they were invited to the banquet. But then Jesus said what's happened is the unthinkable in Hebrew culture, in Middle Eastern culture. When the second messenger came to say, all is ready, come, then they started coming up with excuses. And they were insulting excuses. I have to buy a field and I have to, well, that takes weeks, and that was or I need to test out a pair of oxen. This would have been a slap in the face at the last minute. Or I've just become married, and whatever the excuses were, they were all. And so that's Jesus comparing when the Messiah comes and opens the banquet and he's rejected. So then he said to the messengers, go out into the towns and the waysides and the hills, and in one of the translations it says, and compel the least and the lost to come to the banquet. For the ones who were invited are proven unworthy. So go out and invite the others, considered by society as unclean, unworthy, whatever. And unfortunately it says compel them to come to the banquet. That translation. That translation has led to some devastating history. It led to the Spanish Inquisition. You Jews will convert to Christ, and we're going to torture you for your own good, so that you'll convert to Christ. And if you end up dying, or if we execute you, hey, that's on you. We were told to compel you to come to the banquet. Well, the word compel in Hebrew was not, all right, come with me, I'm going to tie you up and we're going to take you there. It was, if you will, encourage. You take them gently by the hand, and you realize that people say, well, no, I can't possibly be invited to something like this. This doesn't happen for people like me. And so you have to gently compel them by saying, no, this really is an invitation for you. So that I digress, but that's what I do. Okay, so Persian court protocol was the messengers being sent swiftly, and that's it for what I have. So as you see, that's I use this template from something else, and I don't even know what the template presentation has. Yeah, we should study arts and literature, apparently.
You see that's music, and it's Barbra Streisand.
Okay. So we will, there's so much more to go. We've got 4 more chapters. We've already been through roller coaster, ups and downs, and intrigue, and this is a 5-star movie at least. But there's more to come. And what you've done now lays the background for, we'll do at least chapters 7 and 8 next time. That's kind of my plan, is 7 and 8, and then after that 9 and 10. But with me, you never know if there's a detour or. And my battery.
Or someone else talking.
How is that
Your
possible?
battery is running low.
How is that possible?
Oh,
But
you
on
might
time.
want to plug it in.
It is plugged in. It's lit up.